Welcome to the latest session of our semi-annual Publishing Now webinar series, AI and its Opportunities in Publishing Operations. I'm Nicole Tomasi, the Marketing and Conference Manager for Westchester Publishing Services, the editorial, production, and digital conversion services company that supports nearly 700 publishers around the world with getting their books to market more quickly. You'll be hearing more about the use of AI in the publishing industry from our panel in just a few minutes. But I also wanted to share that when you registered for this webinar, we asked if you're using AI in your work, and about 58% of you responded that you do. Before our discussion gets going, just a quick reminder that while your microphones will be muted for the session, you can enter questions in the Q&A box that's located at the bottom of the control bar. The panel will answer as many questions as time allows. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's session, Jim Milliot from Publishers Weekly.
Thanks, Nicole. Good to be here again. We have a panel that I think is very much been discussing the issues of the day. My role here will be to do some brief intros, kind of a little overview of where the industry stands. Then I'm going to introduce the panelists, and our habit here is to introduce everybody all at once. That way, once we get rolling, it's kind of a seamless handoff. So to start, usually I drone on about how the business is doing, but I keep that very short. Yesterday, AAP's first quarter numbers came up, and from their people who respond to the StatShot survey, sales are up about 1% in the first 3 months. Nonfiction has been having trouble in recent years, was down again. Religion, which has been doing pretty well, had a small decline. All the other major publishing segments were up. So I guess to sum up, nothing really new. sort of flat with a little bit of a gain. But of course, there's a lot going on elsewhere. And some new developments in the AI world. Late last week, the judge in the Barks versus Anthropic copyright lawsuit held her final settlement hearing. No decision has been made, but everybody sort of agrees that it looks like the decision is going to go through. For those of you who may not be aware of the $1.5 billion agreement, Anthropic settled out of court, and it was pretty interesting that they decided not to fight it. And then a couple of weeks ago, book publishers for the first time, including 5 publishers and Scott Turrell, representing authors, sued Meta and Zuckerberg, also charging copyright infringement. And they use pretty much the same argument that the people in the Barts case did, in that fair use has not been a clear winner in these cases, but scraping pirate websites seems to be something judges don't like. So that's what Anthropic lost on in their lawsuit, and that's what the publishers are betting on in their new lawsuit. And of course, there are somebody there may know better than I, David or George or Jared, that roughly 100 lawsuits now in the Anthropic world. And the Zuckerberg lawsuit was interesting in that. Again, it sort of echoed what other lawsuits have shown, that they had considered, Facebook, Meta in particular, paying up to $200 million in licensing fees to license the rights to copy these books. But that idea was killed by executives. So they turned to the pirate sites, and that's what they did. So in addition to the concerns about illegal copying, another big concern is that AI titles are going to flood the market. And in the recent lawsuit, there's a couple of statistics that stand out. This one person wrote 171 books in 7 years, And they figured out that he or she used some AI prompts because she left the AI prompts in some of the books. And so I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. And then, of course, about a month or so ago, we had the Shy Girl incident in which Hachette pulled the book um, because there was suspicion that the author used a lot of AI to write the book. And that has drummed up a lot of controversy, which we may touch on here a little bit. Now, to be fair, most publishing contracts do call that for books to be original, but they also can be sort of vague. And I think we'll be seeing a lot more tightening up on that sort of language. And a couple of final notes before I turn it over. This spring, Publishers Weekly published a number that, based on Bowker ISBN titles, 4 million books were published in 2025. Of those, roughly 3.3 million were self-published. Now, at once upon a time, Bowker could distinguish what was self-published and what was come from traditional publishers, but they can't do that anymore. So the suspicion is that some of that 3.3 million titles was AI generated. And lastly, Publishers Weekly, in our annual salary and job survey last year, we've been asking the AI question in kind of broad terms. Our numbers actually sort of correspond with what Nicole just mentioned. 63% of the people who answered our question said that their companies were using AI. And then we asked them what they were using it for. 39% said market research, 37% said publicity and marketing, 23% said forecasting, and 15% said copy editing and proofreading. And then we asked the final question, how do you think AI will affect publishing? And 72% said they think AI will have a negative impact on publishing. So I'm not sure where our panelists stand on that last statement, but we'll find out in short order. It's my pleasure to start the introductions. Jarin Pintana is, we can see there, project manager for Green Book Alliance. It's an international collaboration focused on advancing sustainability in the publishing supply chain. She's a Canadian publishing scholar and holds a Master's of Publishing from Simon Fraser University. She is also engaged with BookNet Canada, one of my favorite organizations, contributing to research on industry trends, and serves on editorial subcommittees on press and the Canadian Women's Studies Journal. She'll be followed by, get to the right place here, George Walkley. George is a leading expert on the impact of artificial intelligence on publishing. He has delivered award-winning training on AI to over 270 publishers in 15 countries, and is a regular speaker at industry events. He also publishes a free weekly newsletter on AI and publishing. In addition to his training and consultancy, George continues to work in the industry as chairman of the Communications Midas, which we still get stuff from, and non-executive director of Burley Dodd Science Publishing, and advisory board member at Bristol University Press. And then moving back, David Stafford is Vice President of Consumer Experience and Success at Dropbox. He's done a lot of stuff in improving the customer's experience and has focused on improve engagement through proactive support strategies and scalable service delivery. Prior to Dropbox, David served in various business capacities, including having held leading roles at leading global companies, including Cisco Systems and Dow Corning. So I think we have a pretty distinguished panel here. And if I haven't mentioned it, so Jarin's going to kick it off, George is second, and David is third. So without further ado, I am fading away, and Jarin, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Jim. Hello, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Jarin Pintana, and I am the project manager for the Green Book Alliance. But today I'm pleased to be discussing the survey, AI Use Across the North American Book Industry 2025. This survey was conducted by the US-based Book Industry Study Group, or BISG, and BookNet Canada, two excellent organizations that I am pleased to be representing today. I had the pleasure of authoring this very interesting report exploring AI use in the English-speaking North American publishing ecosystem. So today I'm just going to do a quick overview of some key highlights, but we will ensure that a link to the full report is circulated as well. Next slide, please. Starting off with adoption, through the survey, we saw that just under 50% of respondents said that they used AI, and organizational uptake was very similar. So it is very much being used in the industry. So we have about 45.8% of individuals and 48% of organizations. Next slide. According to survey responses, AI is most used for admin tasks, marketing, data analysis, editorial, and metadata. It is least used for rights and licensing, QA testing, audiobook creation, translation, and customer service. So we see a general trend of leaning toward workflow optimization over content creation. And this is likely due to a hesitancy that we saw expressed throughout the survey, partly about the ethical implications for a creative industry like publishing, specifically with AI-generated content. One open-ended response that we had from a respondent in the survey who was working at a publisher stated, as an industry, we should be extremely intentional about the ways in which we can appropriately and ethically use it as a tool and avoid embracing the extensive downsides of throwing our industry into generative AI to create any kind of content. So we do see this hesitancy expressed throughout. Which brings us to concerns. When it comes to concerns, there were many that ranked very highly, but among the top few were inadequate control around copyrighted materials, hallucinations, AI content flooding retail platforms, lack of disclosure to consumers around AI-generated content. And only about 0.2% of the survey respondents said that they had no concerns or pain points. So there is a general kind of tension that we're seeing here because we have this widespread use and yet a high number of pain points and concerns. So we're seeing that the industry is adopting AI potentially faster than it is becoming comfortable with it. Next slide. So the areas poised for growth, or where respondents thought that there would be most growth, was data analysis, marketing, admin, metadata, publicity, editorial, and sales forecasting. So again, we see this general lean towards operational efficiency. And it seems that this is, at this point, where the industry feels most comfortable implementing AI at this time. Next. So 56.6% of respondents believe AI training is a good use of their time. And the areas where there was significant interest in practical guidance and best practices were metadata, editorial processes, laws and regulations, sales and marketing applications, ethics, and accessibility. So along with guidance and education, the report remarks that even if you're skeptical or opposed to AI use, there may be a benefit from engaging in the conversation and learning about AI because AI technologies are being widely used across many sectors. And most likely those actively engaging with these tools will have the most influence over how they evolve and how they're governed. Next. This brings us to adoption Canada versus the US. So AI adoption is actually almost identical in the US and Canada, according to our survey. And so we're seeing congruency, at least across the North American markets in terms of uptake. Next. It is also most likely for publishers to have an official AI policy over libraries. Publishers also appear to have higher use of AI, both individually and organizationally, but only marginally. When it comes to libraries and AI, one of the open-ended responses said, as a public library, our community looks to us to provide accurate, vetted information. With the recent AI publications, our team has been having to scrutinize materials purchased more thoroughly, which increases costs in staff time. So we did see also an underlying theme through the survey of a bit of tension between publishers and libraries potentially when it comes to use of AI throughout the workflow. Next. Finally, when it comes to size of an organization, generally, the larger the organization, the more AI use. So from one employee with AI use being about 21.1%, all the way up to organizations with 100 plus employees having an AI uptake of 69.0%. So trending, basically, the larger the organization, it seems the more AI is being used. Next. Thank you. So that's basically my quick overview, but this is also a time when I want to highlight that there will be a new survey in 2026, and you can sign up for the BookNet Canada newsletter to be among the first to know when that survey launches. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. George, up to you.
Jim, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and I'm particularly pleased to be following Jarin because I think the research that has been done has given us a really valuable snapshot of the industry. I'm not presenting slides this afternoon, but I want to talk about 8 impressions that I have at the moment of how the industry is adapting to AI. And as Jim said in his introduction, I have multiple perspectives on this. I'm a publisher involved in several businesses. I'm a consultant working with other publishers on AI training, and I am myself an author, so I understand that perspective as well. I think the first point that I wanted to make is one that we really see in the data. Most people are using AI on some level, but I think that it's worth unpacking the headline figure a little bit because there are some important variations. The first point is that a lot of the time we're now using AI without really thinking about using it. 3 years ago, using a large language model meant doing something really intentional, going to ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever other platform and using it. Now, more likely than not, the AI is integrated into the software that we use every day. Microsoft Office, Google Workspace, Adobe Creative Suite, Canva, GitHub, and of course Dropbox. So lots of people who don't necessarily think of themselves as AI users are probably using it at some point during their working week. The second point is that the survey data gives us a really valuable perspective on the North American market, but it's interesting to see how this compares internationally. My accent may have given me away, but I'm speaking to you this afternoon from the UK. And as I look at the UK and European data, it's broadly similar to the US in terms of the proportion of people using AI. But interestingly, if we look at PW's coverage from last year, we see that surveys of the Latin American book market, on the other hand, show a far higher proportion of people using AI. So it's interesting that I think as we go around the world, we see AI being used to a different degree. Finally, I think it's important to acknowledge that the discourse on AI is very often critical. It's really important that we acknowledge the issues that Jarin highlighted for us. But I think because of those issues, some publishers don't always do the best possible job talking about their usage and about what is actually working well for them. This brings me to my second observation, which is about policy and communications. The research shows that under a third of publishers, at the time the research was carried out, had an AI policy, though many more had one in development. Interestingly, if we look at the data from right here in the UK, the Independent Publishing Survey last year, the proportion of publishers with an AI policy was very similar. Most did not have one. There are good exceptions to this. John Wiley is an example of a publisher that has developed a really good and clear policy for its authors on where it's going to use AI and where they should. But it is a gap in many cases. Where we have a gap in policy and communications, we risk it being filled by individual people making decisions about what to do or what not to do. And from an organizational standpoint, that's really not ideal. My third point is that we should also consider the different types of publishing. The BISG data and BookNet Canada data gives us a sense of publishing and libraries overall. But actually, as we look at different segments of the market, we see somewhat different behaviours. For example, if I look at the academic and university press segment, I see a group of publishers that on the whole are relatively active in AI and in many cases have licensed content to AI models. Similarly, I was in Portland last week for the IBPA and talking to many of the author publishers who were there. That's a segment that has enthusiastically adopted AI as a productivity aid behind the scenes. Conversely, I've spoken to a few children's publishers recently, and children's publishing seems to be an area where there is much more concern and perhaps a little bit more conservatism. People are very concerned, rightly, about the role of illustrators, and where content is being produced for children and marketing messages are being produced for children, people are very cautious about inserting AI into that mix. Trade publishing is somewhere between those two extremes, typically using it in the back office and for processes, but not for creative-facing features. Where AI is being used, I've observed the nature of it is changing. If we had been speaking this time last year, I would have said that the baseline skill set for most publishers was competent prompting of chat tools. If you were at that level, you were doing pretty well. Over the course of the year, that's evolved. We've gone from competent prompting as the baseline to confident delegation to AI agents. Recently, I had an example where I was appearing on stage at an event in Portland, and while I was on stage, I had an AI agent running on my laptop in the corner, carrying out a delegated task for me, which took about an hour and a half to go through and repurpose some content. It did that absolutely perfectly with no measurable error, and it's reflective of the fact that the models are now capable of much more sophisticated tasks. Whereas last year they might be doing something that saved you 5 or 10 minutes and which you needed to look at, they're now often capable of doing something that might take you 60 or 90 minutes and can save you that time. However, that's not an entirely straightforward thing. At the same time that the models have become much more capable, we also have to think much more about the cost of them. Since last November, agent AI systems like Claude Code, Claude Cowork, and others have become really popular. But what we've also seen is they've become incredibly expensive for the AI companies to run. At the moment, we're still in what I call the Uber stage of AI pricing. Most of us will remember when ride-sharing apps first came out, and they seemed very inexpensive compared to traditional taxi cabs. The reason that they were cheap is because they were being subsidized by investors, and they were being subsidized while those companies built market share. And once they built market share, the intention was always to raise price. I think we're seeing something very similar with AI platforms at the moment. For the first time in my own use of Claude, I'm seeing token limits being put in place, usage limits on the number of tasks that I can do a day. And increasingly, the functionality that I want is only available on higher subscription tiers. So, in the long run, I think we have to think about what the cost of these models is going to be and choose the right ones. And this brings me to my sixth observation. Increasingly, as publishers, we're looking at the potential of AI for workflows that are critical to our businesses. 2 years ago, we might have used ChatGPT or Claude to write a short piece of code or to help us with a difficult email. But now we're really looking at much more mission-critical applications. And I think that means thinking much more carefully about the partners that you work with, whether that's enterprise software like Dropbox, or whether that's choosing the AI model that you're going to use for your own workflows. Increasingly, publishers that I talk to are thinking hard about data portability. If you put all of your eggs in one basket and that model stops working, or the price goes up and it's unavailable to you, what are you going to do then? So increasingly, people are keeping data and workflows in their own systems, and AI models are interacting with publishers' data where it lives. All of this so far has really concentrated on technology rather than people. And so just to round this out, I want to make 2 observations about the effect of this on jobs. The first thing is that in my experience of working with 300 and more or more publishers, what AI is not doing is taking away jobs. I think very often where we have seen restructuring and job losses, AI has been a very convenient alibi for what are actually management decisions. Typically, the impact that I see with most of my clients is that there's a range that people save something from a couple of hours up to half a day a week in time. They become that little bit more productive. And that gives them an opportunity to take that time and reinvest it in other tasks. AI is enormously helpful to me personally. I think there's a solid half day a week that I'm getting back as a result of it. But what that also means is that there is 4.5 days a week that AI can't help me with. 4.5 days of tasks that require human ingenuity, human judgment. And this brings me to my final observation, which is about how we think about the impact of AI. It is troubling at the moment. There are major ethical implications to think through. There hasn't been a technology development in history that was simple and straightforward and uncontroversial. We can look back at the impact of desktop publishing in the 1980s. We can look at the emergence of the internet. And we can see within our own lifetimes that there are previous examples of technology being disruptive. I think it's really important we remember what is significant about publishing and what human beings are good at. Judgment. AI is a hand, not a brain. It can help us with tasks that we define, but it shouldn't take over the determination of those jobs. It's really important that we keep human beings in the loop. And to echo a final point from the data and from Jarin's excellent presentation, I think it's really important that we're all engaged in this conversation. Even if you are personally skeptical about AI, you have a seat at the table and you should be involved in the debate. We shouldn't just have enthusiasts at the table and we shouldn't just have critics. We need all voices to come together to determine how this makes sense for our industry. Thank you very much indeed.
Great. Thank you. All right, David, the big finish.
All right, and amazing. Not just a tough act to follow, but George, just tremendous observations. I really enjoyed all of that. There's so many things I want to pick up right where George left off and talk about. And where I'll start is exactly around this human experience. My name is David Stafford. I work for Dropbox. I've been here 11 years. But what's even probably more important to me is I've been a customer for nearly 20 years of Dropbox. And one of the company values is just simply to try to make work human. And that ties right back into what George was just sharing. For us, making work human, it isn't about trying to, whether it be use AI to replace human ingenuity or using AI to try to eliminate the work that goes into all of our jobs, but how do we make this really a partnership with the technology and the humans together? One of the things that Dropbox did, nearly 20 years ago is it was one of the first times that we were able to make cloud something tangible to everyday users of the technology. Rather than the cloud being like someone else's computer, we were able to give a very tangible example of where the cloud made it easier to access data. It made it easier to be able to save or store information and be able to share that with anyone around the world. But one of the things that immediately people gravitated towards was this concern around storing something in the cloud and the loss of control. What does that mean around the intellectual property that's going off and being stored in someone else's computer? And when we start to think of the corollaries between the cloud and AI, there's so many technological elements that I think are very consistent, which is we've gone from discussing whether the hinges on the data centers open inward or outward around security, and much more around how do we make sure that the information that is stored is being responsibly handled. One of the things that we have always held true is, for example, not selling advertisement based on content that information is stored in Dropbox. There's never been any advertising sponsorship. All of our revenue is paid for by the folks that entrust us to be able to keep their data. When we bring that forward to how AI is helping to enhance the overall experience, it comes back to this idea between content versus context. And while I think agent and agentic has been very, very popular, my favorite word in the AI conversation is context. When we are looking at a corpus of knowledge and decisions that we make in our businesses, and all of the workflows that we have, especially within our creative marketing and obviously the publishers here together, when we look at those workflows, how do we make sure that we are leveraging the context around those workflows to be able to help drive greater efficiency and to be that helping hand, as George alluded to? So the goal is never to be producing the core content, but how do we bring together context in all of the different signals together? One of the biggest pieces of context for my working day is actually my calendar. Knowing what is happening and when, knowing who is involved in those decisions, creates this corpus of knowledge around what is the context that I can bring together to help make better decisions faster and quicker. It's never around actually trying to create the content. Much like George, Jim, Jarin, much of all of us are bringing our own perspectives and our own content together. What we're being left to synthesize is that context that ties it all together. So as we are looking to employ, whether it be AI technologies across a variety of different workflows, bring it back to understanding what is acting on the content versus what is acting on the context. That then segues into the trust and the security and the compliance protections around the intellectual property that we're dealing with, as then the obvious next element, the next question around that. And being able to have a very principled discussion around AI is what's going to help discern between, am I helping to move the workflows forward, or am I actually getting dangerously close to generating either content or being able to displace that human element that comes from the human experience that goes around all of that? That's where I get extremely excited about what's become possible in being able to power all of the workflows, whether it be very quickly synthesizing questions that folks might have around how do we make sure that we are employing AI responsibly in a publishing workflow, or content that is being generated. How do we look for and be able to identify where bias is being introduced and that is being handled responsibly? All of that becomes elements that we're able to attach. In my day job, I get to lead the customer experience and customer success organizations for Dropbox. And I found that so fascinating in Jarin's work that customer service was an area that we haven't seen as strong of adoption. This is an area where our content, whether it be the how-to articles or best practices and how to use technology responsibly and safely, this is a huge area of opportunity that we want to be able to help make sure that that authoritative content is being able to be disseminated through all of the different surfaces that it may be made available to, whether it be a search using a popular search tool or in our day-to-day workflows. So when you bring all of this together, making sure that we are retaining the human experience, making sure that we are distinguishing between content and context, and doing so in a trustworthy manner, all of that combined creates an opportunity for us to be able to continue to partner and work together, both as industry professionals and experts, as you all are today, as well as the technology providers and vendors that wish to support and protect our creative industry and ensure those property rights are maintained. And so with that, thank you so much for having me today, and I'll turn it back to Jim.
Hey, well, we have a number of questions, as you might guess. What are the externalities that you are most concerned about? And I guess the point here is, what regulations or guardrails are being considered to avoid these issues at the companies that are using AI? George, start with you.
I can make a start on this. Like a lot of people, my big concern is the environmental impact of AI. This is something most of us have become very aware of over this year with the building of giant data centers. I think Let me start by being really clear that the standard of environmental reporting from the AI industry is nowhere near good enough. Google put out some quite limited research last year. Mistral put out some actually quite good peer-reviewed research on its environmental footprint. But for most of the large AI companies, there is a lack of data and a lack of transparency. There is clearly a non-zero environmental impact from all of this. That's true of everything that we do already. As an industry, we put printed books onto trucks and we send them around the world. And most of us have come to terms with the idea that we put that in context because of literacy, education, enjoyment, and the good things that the industry delivers. In the same way, I look at, say, the university press that I advise and the way that they use AI. I look at the scientific publisher where I work and which uses AI, and I see the AI as fulfilling the same mission. It's helping people to learn, it's helping with education and literacy and enjoyment. So I think it is important that we put that externality in context alongside everything else we do. The reality as consumers is that most of what we do has an impact. But I think that is one that as a society we need to come to grips with. And I think it's quite interesting that it's becoming such a big issue this election cycle.
Right, okay. Hey, Jarin, I was just wondering, has the Green Book Alliance looked into this at all?
I don't think specifically. So again, the survey was by BASG and BookNet. But I think within that, I don't know if we've gotten into specifically like what guardrails can be put up, but I can speak to, the boundaries and simply based on kind of the attitudes expressed in the survey. I think transparency is a big one so that anyone, using, reading, or disseminating that material down the line knows how AI has been involved. We did see that, lean away from generative AI. And I think as has been said throughout, this webinar, just a consistent call for human involvement, ideally in an intentional way rather than back checking things after the fact, because at some point people and AI generated content will interact, but it's sort of a matter of at what point does it lean on the production side, or is it going to fall to retailers and libraries and consumers to be the first real point of contact who are kind of vetting this material? So I think essentially it seems that what the industry has at least called for in the data that we have seen is, I think, intentional use, intentional involvement, and thoughtful integration, which we can see sometimes can be challenging because it is so integrated in some of the tools that we're already using. But I think that's where the education piece comes in and really just understanding, what the implications are of how it is being used and when.
David, do you have anything you'd like to chime in on this question?
On this one, I'll just pick up what Jarin mentioned around the transparency. And when we are looking at a pure interaction with an AI model, it's important to recognize the role that RAG or retrieval augmented generation is playing, because what you're doing is you're increasing the corpus of knowledge that AI is acting on. And so when it comes to the transparency, it's not that this is always going to be a hallucination coming directly from a model. It could be gathering information that is either part of an organization's knowledge set, again, inappropriately or failing to credit the source information that was being brought in to use it in some of the examples you mentioned earlier on. Not just transparency, but I would go as far as like hyper transparency, making sure that we are affording proper attribution to the source material all the way down the line, especially when it is extended beyond the model itself as being the source.
Right, okay. All right, well, we have you on the line. This one is initially directed to you, but George could chime in if he wants. And the question is, some on our team are quick to adopt new technology and some are much more cautious. The tension is palpable. Any advice for how we can adopt more AI tech for workflow improvement without leaving anyone behind?
For me, I think that starts with being able to pick up within the systems that you're already using. I love George's comment that we're seeing AI not being something that you go off to use an AI tool in order to be able to use AI, but AI is surfacing within the tools that we already have, whether that be anything from a Canva to a to an office productivity suite. So I think that it's probably going to be very akin to how people started to dip their toe into using cloud services, where all of a sudden you were seeing additional extensions from the applications and from the workflow tools that you already use that were starting to provide AI generated answers, AI generated capabilities, being able to extend that. And so making sure that you're working within the tools that you trust, that you already understand the AI principles that those tools or vendors employ and how they extend their capabilities with AI is going to make this a very natural progression for people that may not consider themselves technology enthusiasts. It's just understanding where those answers are coming from and what guardrails are in place. But George, I might even kick it over to you because this is an area that you were very eloquent about.
Well, look, 100, I 100% agree with what David has said. I think it's a lot of this is about putting the technology in the context of someone's daily work. Someone said to me recently, talking about really big companies that had put a large language model on everybody's desktop, that was a little bit like giving everyone in a company the internet in 1998 and expecting that they would know what to do with it. The fact is that back then the internet didn't necessarily make sense to everyone, but over time we figured out where it was relevant to our daily role, what it would do for us. And when a piece of technology does something for you, it becomes a much more valuable part of your day. So a lot of this for me is starting with the jobs that people are doing, understanding really how people are spending their time, which tasks are taking the most time, which tasks are actually sucking the most energy from them, and which ones they really enjoy doing. And that allows you to be a little bit more intentional, to use that word again, about which tasks you're going to keep as a human being, which tasks an AI might help you with. But it's got to be grounded in the specifics of your day to day.
Okay. It's clear from some of the questions we're getting and had previously. There's a lot of questions out there. It's certainly around employment and how it's used in-house. So we're going to another one. I think this echoes the general talking about AI is going to be a job killer. So David, do you think AI is another version of outsourcing? Many Americans in publishing lost their jobs after 20 years of service to outsourcing. Phenomenon started in 2005, still going strong. Are we heading towards the same garden path with AI?
Quite the contrary. Again, I work in my day job involves a fair degree of outsourcing when it comes to things like customer support. What we are able to do by elevating the role of our support agents, of our technical support experts, we are able to operate at such a scale and such a sophistication level because of the augmentation. Again, I love George's use of it's a helping hand, not a helping brain. And so being able to leverage that to be able to scale the effectiveness is something that's just going to raise the intelligence and the human element so much higher than what was possible before. I grew up. I'm a child of the '80s from Michigan, right in the heart of the auto industry, and I'll never forget when robotics was going to threaten the manufacturing jobs, and had family members that worked in the auto industry putting seatbelts into cars every day. The ability to be able to up level, upskill, and also just simply protect that human ingenuity is something that is arguably, raising the floor and the roof. I believe, as someone was speaking earlier, raising the floor and the roof together in order to be able to help that. So I'm absolutely not concerned about the safety of jobs. It's just proving to too many times to be raising both together.
George or Jarin, either of you want to chip in?
Again, I mean, I don't want to sort of continue with the theme, but I mean, I agree with what David has said on that. I think the other thing to keep in mind with AI is that this is unlike previous waves of technology. This is a very interesting pattern of usage. AI is really a lot of it built around language. I work with clients in a number of industries, manufacturing, professional services, aerospace, as well as publishing. And it's really striking to me how good publishers are at using AI. Why? Because we think clearly, we know how language works, we understand how the substrate of this technology operates. And so publishers are very good at it. The barrier to entry here is very low. This isn't some technology revolution that's going to, just get away from you and you're going to be behind it. Anyone who's on this call has the ability to experiment at very low cost with AI to get really amazing results. The things that are possible for people to do, it's extraordinary. So I think that this is a wave of technology that people can embrace if they choose to.
Jarin, anything?
No, I think they covered it great. Thanks,
Okay.
Jim.
All right, great. Okay. All right. So, sort of on a positive note, um, which new skills should we learn to use and manage AI products in this academic space of publishing? What's the best way to upskill and pivot? And sort of related, are there any good sources for training on using AI in publishing? So, George, you're unmuted, so you go first.
Thank you. Look, I think there are lots of really good places to look and learn. I've delivered training through the IBPA and the IPG in the UK, and if you have a look at my website, you can get details on that. There are also really good free training courses available. LinkedIn does a very good one. There are courses available from Google and others. What I would say with all of this is that this is an area where experimentation is as important as documentation. You can read all of this stuff, but if you're not actually trying this out yourself, you probably don't have a good idea of what's possible. As you try it out, there are things that are going to work, there are things that will not work, but you learn from that. So I think the most important thing is just get started with this, understand what it's capable of doing. And then from there you can form an opinion on whether it's useful to you.
David, anything to add on that?
Not much. I think the one thing that I'm probably most impressed by across most AI tools is just the ones that are very quick and simple to be able to have those starter prompts, where it doesn't require you to put a whole lot of extra effort into crafting the perfect prompt to get the perfect response, but allowing the tools to kind of show you what its strengths are and what's possible. Because when I follow what we call the happy path, when you allow the tools to kind of guide you to what they're good at, you find yourself not putting yourself in a corner for the hallucinations and for the inappropriate or bizarre answers as much. And so just get comfortable and I love the examples of the having the early days of the internet on your computer, not knowing what to do with it. One of the very, very first things I remember from the internet days was, "Don't worry, like you're not going to break the internet by by typing the wrong thing. Chances are you're not going to break your AI by asking it the wrong thing. At worst cases, you might get a chuckle."
Just on the subject of kind of academic usage specifically, and this is an opinion that was expressed in the survey from a library, which is kind of, I think, just highlighting, we all have our biases, of course, which is why, we put our names on, our creations that we share with others, and why you have to cite sources specifically in, academic works. And so one of the problems that arises, I think, with AI in an academic landscape is that it can naturally kind of cover where the information has come from. It's hard enough to double check, where, like, the sources of an article written by a professional academic. So if you're using a database with millions of sources, how are we going to see where that information came from? How are we going to fact check that? So I think that it's one of those things to consider. It comes back to transparency, and just understanding how it's being used, especially, I think, even more so, like, yes, in publishing, but then even more so in an academic landscape, is understanding, like, where did that information come from? And we're seeing this come through, which is that if it's scraping or it's creating hallucinations or anything like that, and then you're citing that within like an academic paper, who is to blame for that? So that's not necessarily on a positive note, but I think it's one of the areas that is a large area of concern. And I think just something that if you can address thoughtfully, especially within that like academic landscape, and this is where we're lacking guardrails. There isn't necessarily a solution for this yet, but I think that is one area that is important to consider.
George, if you want to add anything, that's fine.
Just very briefly, I think Jarin's absolutely right about the importance of authenticity, about the how sensitive this is in the academic context. We've seen examples of academic journals that are being overwhelmed by the volume of submissions, which are apparently being written by AI. I was very interested that last week the preprint server, I never know how to pronounce it, Archive, I think, announced that there was essentially going to be a one strike and you're out policy, that if you were found to have used AI to author a paper, you would be blocked from submitting to them ever again until you had a paper accepted by another peer-reviewed journal, so effectively a way back. But I think we do need those guardrails, we do need those sanctions where something has gone wrong. But I don't think that takes away from the practical utility of some of these tools, particularly in the back office and particularly in some of the processes that we use to communicate this information to the world.
Okay. All right. This last question, well, maybe the last question, but the next question at any rate comes from someone who's trying to write policies to training staff at the company. So they're wondering about as AI becomes a more commonly used technology, how we guide authors to use these tools in a balance while keeping human ingenuity and creative voice intact without relying too much on AI. That
Um,
sounds like a tricky question, but let's see what we got.
I've got a really simple answer to this one, which is not to use AI, but use good old-fashioned imitation. The John Wiley guidelines on author use of AI are publicly available on the Wiley website. Wiley is not a client. I had nothing to do with them. I'm completely unbiased. I just think that they are a model of clarity and detail. Now, they may not be right for your organization because every publisher is different, but I think the folks at Wiley did an amazing job putting them together. I think they provide a really useful reference. And as you're formulating your own policies and plans, I think looking at that would be a really interesting guide if you haven't done it.
Yeah, I'm just going to follow right on with that. This is what I meant around the AI principles. Before we did anything at all, whether it be internal use or customer-facing use with AI, it was establishing what our AI principles were. And so if there's a resource, as George mentioned, that you'd be able to use as the starting point, evaluate that line by line as it applies to your organization, to the content that you work with, to the authors, and to the subject matter that you deal in. But establishing those AI principles just makes it so much easier to be able to come and evaluate whatever the question is, going back to that set of AI principles. That's something that we have our corporate AI principles, and then my organization has even a next layer of AI principles as it comes to, support documentation. We want this to be accessible. We want this to be picked up by the language models so that you're able to get an accurate response for knowing how to work with the tools. And so being able to use AI guidelines such as the Wiley content George mentions, I think would be an obvious starting point.
Okay, and this might be just digging a little deeper in that, David. At a small company, do you have any recommendations for some AI workflows that could be effective? If you don't have a dedicated AI team, you're small. Is there like a system that really works
Sure.
well? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, I think the deeper you get into the acronyms, probably the more sophisticated of an organization you're going to want to have around doing this. So this is where I bring it back to look at the tools, look at the tools that already support the workflows that you have today, and evaluate how those tools are bringing AI to the surface to the workflow. So if you're around the illustration side, understand how AI is working within the Adobe Creative Suite, understand how AI is working within the tools like Canva. But that's, again, that's leaning more onto the content side. Another very, very safe way to be able to start to explore AI is to focus on the context side of that equation. Don't be so much focused on what is the content that I'm trying to produce, but what is the workflow that I'm trying to automate? What am I trying to drive efficiency? What am I trying to be able to scale my organization, especially a small organization, quicker? Focus on the context work more so than the core content publishing, as a way that you're going to be able to get a lot farther quicker, especially as a small, creative shop with a solopreneur or just a few people on staff.
I
Okay.
can hop in on that as well, Jim,
Sure.
real quick. Just in terms of this survey data in the report, I don't know the stat off the top of my head, but we did see sort of an encouragement from a certain percent of organizations for people to try experimenting with AI. There are a lot of organizations saying, yes, I want my staff to, try it out and see where it can fit into their workflow. But within that, also making sure that, people understand the difference, for example, between AI models, between a model that is public where the data becomes available to other users or is used to train, a wider model versus a model where all the data stays internal to a company, for example. So we did see sort of this trend as well of like safe experimentation.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, our time is almost up. I've been doing this for a while. 42 questions in the Q&A. I do believe is a record, Nicole. So apparently there's a lot more to be answered. And for that, I'm turning this back over to Nicole.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to our panel for a very excellent session today. We hope all of you who were able to join us found this equally interesting and motivating. We did share some resources in the chat panel, and there will be more information coming out later this week, including an email from us with the video link and additional content. And please also keep a lookout for a summary article that will be in Publishers Weekly a few weeks down the line, and we'll share that out to all of you once it becomes available. As you're exiting the webinar, there'll be a 2-question survey to just let us know how we did, and we take that feedback and use it to bring you additional sessions that will hopefully be equally informative and relevant to things that are going on within the publishing industry. So please take a moment to do that. And if there is anything we can do to help you within your editorial or production workflow to help you get books to market more quickly and keep that human element that we all strive to have in the creative and the educational process, please reach out to us. We'd love to talk with you and learn how we can support your particular products. And with that, I'm going to thank everyone and hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.